There have been hints for years now that the big tech companies, Twitter, Facebook, Google, had a sinister agenda, a political agenda, also a social agenda, also an international agenda. There have been hints of that for a long time, for years, and for years we've been telling you about it. But within 24 hours, the last 24 hours, they bared their teeth simultaneously and made it obvious. The big tech companies, those monopolies, shut down a legitimate news story in the middle of a presidential campaign and made it impossible for many Americans to read the facts about the news. That's never happened before in this country. It is a moment that historians will look back on as a turning point. Sohab Ahmari is the op-ed editor at the New York Post, the newspaper that broke the story originally, and he has a particularly insightful view of what this means and where it might be going. We want to talk to him about it tonight. Thanks so much for coming on. So we're right in the middle of this, but I think you agree that this is different from what's come before. We've never seen anything like this happen before in this country. What does it tell us, and what does it portend?
Tucker, I think it just should suggest a level of blatantness that we haven't seen before. It began actually with Facebook. We've talked a lot about Twitter, but it began with Facebook, and specifically a Facebook communications staffer named Andy Stone, saying that this story deserves to be fact-checked, and in the meanwhile, Facebook is going to reduce its circulation online. And what was fascinating, disturbing, alarming about it is that Andy Stone, before he joined Facebook, was a staffer for Senator Barbara Boxer, Democrat of California, and for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And so the fact that they allowed him to go forward and say that we're reducing circulation on a story before there were any disputes about it, and there's still, as you showed earlier, there isn't really any disputes about the underlying facts, but he felt courageous enough, bold enough to just say, as a former Democratic staffer who now has his hand over the levers of the internet, essentially, of where free speech lives or dies, is on these platforms, I'm going to reduce circulation of this story. This is different than before, and it's truly chilling and sinister.
Where are the journalists in this? Where are the guardians of the First Amendment, the people who make their living by the first point in the Bill of Rights, the freedom of the press? They're not saying anything. I mean, just to be clear, the big tech companies control the overwhelming majority of American media, directly or indirectly. And yet journalists are not speaking up against censorship. Why?
I mean, I think there's this culture of groupthink where it really feels like all the elements of the establishment have lined up. You have big tech, you have Hollywood, you have media, and they're all so bought into a kind of narrative where if a story is put forward, including a story which, you've seen some of the emails, we've published the emails, it's so much more solidly sourced than so many of the mountain of stories, of anti-Trump stories that appeared in left-of-center media that were all based on hearsay. You would think journalists would say, let's dig into this. But immediately it becomes an effort to either shut it down or to attack the source and not to investigate the underlying fact of massive potential graft and corruption. So the most chilling aspect was seeing a journalist like Jake Sherman, again, you mentioned him earlier, he had won the victory over himself, to quote George Orwell. He posted this long apology for having posted our story and raised some questions about it. That's the chilling effect in this, is that if you, going forward, if you publish stories that go against the narrative, you will have to kind of publicly confess and apologize. And you're talking about a story in the oldest continuously published newspaper in this country, founded by Alexander Hamilton. It's not some shady website. And you saw the story. It was deeply reported. This is shameful in terms of my fellow reporters and editors.
It's one of the biggest circulation newspapers in this country. It's not a small thing. How can someone like Jake Sherman, apologizing for asking a question, for forwarding a news story, how can someone like that continue to work in journalism? How can this go on?
Well, I think, look, what we can do is continue to just present our reporting. We've been extremely transparent about our sourcing, about the provenance from the beginning of the story, much more so than, say, that story about suborning perjury, the president suborning perjury that appeared in BuzzFeed. That was immediately debunked by the Mueller team itself. It said that that's not true. Has that story been censored? Was it banned by Facebook? Was it reduced in circulation by Twitter?
Yeah.
No. you can still post it, and it wasn't then. So the hypocrisy is glaring. All we can do is continue to get the word out, and hopefully more Americans can hear it.
Look, I get that a lot of these people don't like Trump. Fine. We've got an election in 3 weeks. But don't destroy our country. Don't destroy centuries-old traditions that underpin everything good that we have. And freedom of speech and of thought, expression, conscience, that's what we have. That's what makes this country different and better. And they're wrecking it because they don't like Trump. I can't even.
Yeah, and I worry about the international ramifications. What if there's an election in, say, Spain or Poland where the Populist Party is unpopular with the establishment? How will our malign internet forces affect elections and democracies elsewhere in the developed world?
We're going to have to live with the consequences of this poison long after Trump is gone. It's very upsetting. Sabah Mari, thank you so much. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.